Hey guys, it's Jack. I just wanted to talk to you today about a way that you can help support the podcast if you're not already. To support the channel is to become a Patreon member. So we have Patreon memberships that start at just $5 a month. And when you sign up, you get access to all of our episodes ad free. That's the big bonus for that. I mean, we also do some Patreon bonus episodes for our subscribers. But this is the biggest and best way that you can support the Team House channel and podcast if you'd like to. And we really appreciate that. So go and check us out at patreon.com/the Team House.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Eyes On. I'm Andy Milburn.
I'm Jason Lyons.
I'm Dimitri Kontakos.
D, no shortage of news as usual.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
What do you want to kick off with? I mean, this horrible news of the fire and some 35 to 40 deaths in Rafah. And I for one, I don't really have anything to pile on with at this point. Obviously, it's just the images are horrible, and I have written about deconfliction procedures, the issues with deconfliction procedures in the Gaza conflict, or lack thereof. And so, I'm not going to pile in at this point and make assumptions. But just to say, it's again another very tragic incident. Anything else on that guys?
No.
I'm treading carefully because I know it's a lot of people are as when these things happen on both sides become very emotional.
Yeah.
Yeah, I figured, we definitely have to mention it because it was in the news this weekend, front and center, obviously. Seems like Israel doesn't, this is my opinion, doesn't really care about deconfliction whatsoever.
Certainly it's fair to say, as I've written their standards, and I've been detailed about this and shown how their standards are a lot different than ours in the U.S. military. Let me put it that way. But how about this? So and U.S. papers kind of, they didn't gloss over it, but I'm talking about Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant's declaration on Wednesday night. He made a public address accusing the government of mismanaging the war. Let me say that again. That is the defense minister accusing the government, of which he is part, of mismanaging the war. But specifically, of course, he is targeting Netanyahu. And I think as I said, this wasn't kind of front page news necessarily in US papers, but this is huge in Israel because, not simply because he is the defense minister, but because the belief is that he is not just representing himself or a political, small political group within the government, to include Benny Gantz, those, the so-called centrists. But indeed that he represents the institution, the IDF and the Shin Bet in particular. And ranged on the other side, of course, are the extreme right-wing members of Netanyahu's cabinet, the most notorious of which are Ben Gvir and Smoldrich. And so this is, as far in Israeli eyes, this is the final showdown. And there's no doubt where, the sympathies of, I think, most Israelis lie in this. Gallant is, he's an iconic figure. Yes, he's by no means a centrist, but he is certainly a national hero. He was in from the late 70s, Israeli Special Operations Forces, specifically Flotilla 13, which is their equivalent of the SEALs, just fewer movies and books. But I mean, he was tier one of tier one. I mean, he was involved in these targeted killings overseas that Ronan Bergman has written about in that excellent book, Rise and Kill First. Yoav Gallant appears very frequently in that book as leading these targeted killing teams. So, certainly he's not by himself on this, and he and Netanyahu have had a long falling out that precedes even Netanyahu firing him back in March of 2023. And you'll notice two other things that have happened this week that are not necessarily being that haven't been connected, at least not in US media. This last week, the IDF made released documents that showed that Netanyahu, they had warned Netanyahu 4 times about Hamas in the period of late 2022, early 2023. All right, so this is probably not coincidental. That's kind of a bombshell. And then the IDF spokesman, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, the guy with those massive ears, looks like Dr. Spock. Not Dr. Spock, Mr. Spock. Anyway, so he made a comment today, not today, on Tuesday, that implied that the IDF was having to take a step back, or the gains made by the IDF were slipping away because, and he worded it such like it would be different if we had some kind of national goals, right, or strategy. That's the public affairs guy from the IDF. So, none of this is coincidental. So Gallant came on Israeli TV, and he asked 3 questions. And the first, I thought this was very well delivered. It wasn't a long rambling speech. But the first question was to Netanyahu: do you want a short war or a long one? And this question's really at the heart of Gallant's demand that the government at least discuss, and then decide on an alternative to Hamas in Gaza, which would inevitably hasten the end of major fighting and give the IDF some direction. So the second question, he asked Gallant, well, it wasn't really a question. He asked Netanyahu to declare that he opposes, get this, that Netanyahu opposes an Israeli military or civil governance of post-Hamas Gaza. In other words, he's insisting that the prime minister tell the country and the world that he will not pursue occupying Gaza and managing civilian issues there the way that a military government would, as happened in the territories, for instance, after the 6-day war, with a lot of institutional bad memory for the Israelis, and he doesn't want to, and also, of course, Gallant, memories of Lebanon. Gallant doesn't want Israel to end up in another quagmire like that, or indeed the West Bank, in which it is in a situation that it rules over millions of hostile Palestinians. To the security forces, that's a terrible scenario that could possibly even destroy the state, in the near or long term. Nor does there's no doubt about it that on Netanyahu's right, and Ben-Gvir and Smotrich have been quite open about this, the right wing want to resettle Gaza with Israeli settlers, right? Gallant knows this, and 20 years ago, Gallant was the military advisor to then Prime Minister Ariel Sharon when Sharon ordered the withdrawal, oversaw the total Israeli disengagement from the Gaza Strip, to include breaking down and removing the settlements. You know, I mean, Sharon, I mean, the reasons for that, of course, are quite separate. But so interestingly, you see what I'm saying, that that this is a fundamental split now, and that was, you know, that was uh, although he didn't say so explicitly, Gallant's not opposed to the Palestinian Authority playing a role in management of the Gaza Strip, which is something that is anathema to Netanyahu and the extreme right wing. And Gallant thinks that that is because, well, he knows, he thinks he knows, or whatever. You know, the claim is that the right wing essentially support Hamas because Hamas is the unacceptable face of Palestinian Authority, small a, right, to the Israelis. So as long as Hamas represents Gaza, then there can be no talk of a two-state solution. And they know that, and therefore want Hamas to continue front and center. But they can't say that, you know. So that's the rift there. Right, and then. So that was the second, to make a statement. Yeah, there's, you know, we absolutely have no intention of military governance, of occupation of the Gaza Strip. Gallant, by the way, so it is said, has been in discussions about, and you know, with the US about a solution that involved an interim Palestinian Authority government backed by Arab states, notably Jordan, and UAE, possibly Egypt. So anyway, the third decision, though, that he's asking Netanyahu is about the future of the government, of the Israeli government. You know, it's basically, which side are you on? That's what he's asking. Are you going to stand with me and Benny Gantz and Gadi Eisenkot, you know, two fellow generals who are relatively centrist, although, you know, really right of center, or are you going to go with the far right ministers? What's his name? It sounds like Beelzebub, Bezalel, Smotrich, and Itamar Ben-Gvir. And that was the, you know, that's the subtext. But the question is, what is, you know, what is the future of the government? Gallant called for advancing the national interest over all other interests. All right, that's, you know, that's very thinly coded text for, yeah, you know, ditch your political ambitions and stop putting them before national interests. But, you know, so Netanyahu has to make a decision. I mean, there's no way that Gallant's going to make this the public challenge and then just back down. But Netanyahu knows that a decision to place governance of Gaza in the hands of the Palestinian authorities will lead to confrontation with both Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, and possibly loss of their support, the right-wing support. That's not going to bring the government down immediately, but it's certainly going to hurt Netanyahu's chances. Which, you know, I mean, it's surprising he believes he does have them as a political future.
So, Andy, let me ask real quick. It seems, and this is just my limited observation, that these public back and forth between politicians is normal there, like it is here. But is that normal between a defense minister and the prime minister to be so public?
No, not at all. This is unprecedented. Absolutely. I mean, there have been, you know, certainly confrontation within the cabinet is something that is more public than it is here, and it's almost an expectation at times. But nothing like this has occurred before. I mean, this is monumental. It's not more of the same. And I think, from anyone's perspective, it's good news. So anyway, any decision by Netanyahu to fully withdraw from Gaza, and turn over governance to someone else is going to lead the far right ministers' parties, which represent religious Zionism, and I think the other one's called Yehudit, Otzma Yehudit. It'll cause those parties to exit the coalition. And that's what's kind of hanging over his head. And then so then Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, they come tearing out of the wings, right? And they demand that Netanyahu fire Gallant, right? You can't make this shit up. Calling him a Trojan horse, all right? This is a guy who's, again, national hero. But the thing is, Netanyahu can't fire Gallant. He's not as strong as he was when he's fired previous defense ministers, and counting Gallant before, he's fired 3. He's got no choice, not only to endure this kind of revolt, but to make a decision. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens, because I can't see Netanyahu making a decision. I can see him just keeping, trying to edge it along. And so that puts the ball back into Gallant's court. But this isn't even mutiny on the King mutiny. I mean, mutiny on, what is it? The King mutiny. Sorry, mutiny on the Bounty was on. But it's not like you're taking over a ship. How are they going to seize power against Netanyahu's will? That's really what it's going to come down to, because I think it will come down to that. And Netanyahu is in a corner, because other Likud members not connected to the defense establishment have come out of the woodwork and said, "Hey, you know what? Yeah, I warned him about Hamas too, and." I've been saying for a long period of time that that we needed to come up with a solution for Gaza. Anyway, I pause there to see if you guys. I'm not laughing about the situation, but it's it is going to be interesting to see what happens.
I wonder how much of this is being pushed publicly as well to as usual, sway public opinion one side or the other, and maybe force one hand or the other, publicly.
Yeah, absolutely, Jason. That's what I was kind of hinting at earlier, is public opinion, manipulation of public opinion via, leaked memos or open off the record comments by senior government officials or generals are fairly common. But these things gather momentum, and it really looks as though that I don't want to use the analogy of rats leaving a ship, but it does look as though people are running for the exits a little bit, distancing themselves from Netanyahu.
Gotcha.
And there was something else that I wrote it down here. Gallant came up with something on Wednesday night. Okay. The day after Hamas will only be achieved through the rule of Palestinian elements that form an alternative to Hamas. Unfortunately, no such plan has been brought for debate, and worse yet, no alternative has been presented in its place. So, that's pretty unequivocal. And he has said openly that he has no problem, that not only no problem, but he thinks the only alternative to Hamas is rule of Palestinian elements, whether that is a Palestinian authority, or there has been talk of turning the responsibility of governance over to a coalition of influential Palestinian families who may have the trust and support of the population, certainly more so than either the Palestinian Authority or Hamas. So, there are he's open-minded enough to look at all these alternatives that involve Palestinians running either the interim, running the government. So and that is, yeah, that is absolutely an anathema to segments of the Israeli population. But what's going to be interesting, to your point, Jason, is how far will the public manipulation go? Is there going to be a point where just the sheer pressure, not violence, but or threat of violence, but just kind of this sheer political, social pressure for Netanyahu to go will force him to do so, to resign? I mean, there's already demonstrations in the streets, and now open revolt in his cabinet. What more do you need other than to be physically forced out of power? And we all hope that it doesn't come to that.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, the campaign continues. While an entire division is focused now on Rafah, and you'll see that this time they are sealing the Philadelphia corridor that cuts off Gaza from Egypt. Hence that incident the other day. Dee, you mentioned when we were chatting about this before, and for the benefit of our listeners, the incident was a shooting incident involving both Israelis and Egyptians, resulting in the death of an Egyptian soldier this last week. Nothing released publicly. What I am hearing is that it was or at least this is what is coming through the IDF, that it was a kind of a crossfire incident. The IDF thought that they had received shots, reported they received shots, returned fire. The Egyptians thought that they were under fire. You've seen this play out anyway in our own forces, unfortunately. So essentially a blue on blue. But still, it contributes to considerable tension between the Israelis and the Egyptians, but they are united for the moment on ensuring that border is sealed, and that no one from Hamas or even the population of Gaza crosses that border. The Egyptians have so many problems of their own in the Sinai, but within Egypt, there are mounting tensions because Egypt is being hammered by problems in the Red Sea. Of all countries, Egypt is the country that's suffering worse. So Egypt, in turn, has been making some money on the situation in Gaza. For instance, the price of getting an aid truck from Arish or Alexandria, the price that has to be paid to the Egyptian government is something like $5,000 per truck. As opposed to pre-war, it was $1,000 a truck. So there's like a 5-time markup on these transit fees.
Surge pricing essentially for fucking humanitarian aid.
Yeah, same thing for customs. And so, but still the Egyptian economy is suffering. And of course the population is as amped up as Arab populations and indeed some Western populations throughout the world over the situation in Gaza. So, the Egyptian military, of course, it's a military rule there. They're holding the lid on a simmering pot. The Israelis suspect that the Egyptian army is heavily infiltrated by the Muslim Brotherhood, and that this occurred under Morsi during the 1 year Morsi was in power, prior to Sisi overthrowing, and Morsi was a Muslim Brotherhood leader who was elected to power in Egypt before being overthrown by a coup. But in any case, according to the Israelis, he has heavily infiltrated the Egyptian army with Muslim Brotherhood, which is going to be a problem if that is true for Sisi, as more so than the Israelis. I mean, remember the history of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. It's been one of violent revolt or action, followed by incredibly brutal repression. It was the Muslim Brotherhood who killed Anwar Sadat in 1981 during a military review. You know, the reviewing troops. I don't know if you've seen the video of it, but it's, you know, they jump off one of the, you know, the vehicle in the drive past and kill him. And those were, and so you know, so there's all kinds of domestic tensions on both sides of the border that mean you know, have resulted in this kind of this fragile agreement between the Israelis and the Egyptians, but certainly not a lot of goodwill. I'll pause there for a moment. D, any questions, guys? Or oh yeah, sorry, go on.
Jay?
No, I was gonna talk about the video that was not leaked but posted by Netanyahu's son.
Oh yes, yeah. Jason, go. Yeah, just outline that for everyone.
Yeah. So briefly, speaking of swaying public opinion. So on Saturday, the IDF authorities stated that they were going to launch a formal investigation into a video that was posted on to Telegraph by Netanyahu's son Yair. And in the video, it shows an alleged IDF soldier in fatigues holding a rifle. He's wearing a black mask, and he's standing in what appears to be a blown out building, rubble, graffiti on the walls behind him, all that. And so in the video, he says, "We, the reserve soldiers, do not intend to hand over the keys to any Palestinian authority," adding that they would not cede power in Gaza to Hamas or Fatah. And then so this is being addressed to Netanyahu, but he is specifically talking about Gallant. And addressing him, Gallant, directly, he said, "You cannot win a war, resign. You cannot win the war. You cannot command us. We will listen to one leader, and it is not the Minister of Defense. It is not the Chief of Staff. It is the Prime Minister. Think carefully to whom you intend to give the keys after this." And so later in the video, he told Gallant to change the record, and understand that we want to win, or we will go only with the Prime Minister, only with whoever decides that we should win. We will follow him. Here I tell you, did you want a military coup? So, and then he goes on to say, "We're the reservists who can no longer return home. We will show you what a decision is. We will show you what a victory is, and we will show you how real Jews win."
You just,
go ahead.
Again, you just can't make this up, can you?
No.
I mean, you know, Gallant, and that may have been what prompted, you know, one of the things that prompted Gallant to do what he did, because this is absolutely absurd. So, first of all, Yair Netanyahu isn't even in Israel. In fact, he's not far from where I am now. He's in Miami, living in a luxury condo where he has been since before the war, and hasn't volunteered to go back to Israel to do anything else, you know. And the Israeli papers have written about this, even the, you know, right-wing ones, showing that, you know, I mean, the papers love doing this, you know, photographs of his apartment, the tennis courts, spa, game lounge, private cinema, wine cellar, cigar room, you know. I mean, anyone who's been to Jack's house will recognize but so now he emerges, right, and produces this video. The IDF, of course, went apeshit, launched an investigation of its own, citing all the violations of various rules. Jason, I thought, you know, I said earlier that I'd heard that the guy in the video wasn't even a reservist, you know, which is almost hard to imagine if he is, you know, in Israel, and Israeli. But I can't find, you know, I don't know now where I got that information. So it could be it could be bogus, but regardless, it doesn't really matter whether he's a reservist or not. This was clearly a staged video for the benefit of his father. But just the fact that he thought he could get away with it really blows my mind.
Yeah. And he even said, Yair made a separate post on Telegram and said, in light of the reactions to the reserve video circulating on the networks, let's sort out the question of what a military rebellion is. An army that announces that in times of dispute, it will only obey the government and the prime minister. It's not a rebellion, but on the contrary, is an army that obeys the law.
Hey, you know what? I've written about that. When you were compelled, when it is your duty to disobey orders. But no, that doesn't fall into that category. But you can see how, we talk, when I say we, but I mean, from time to time, there's somewhat hysterical speculation in the States about the prospects for civil war. But I can tell you that the divisions in Israel feel far more raw when you're there than they ever do here. I mean, part of that's a function of geography, but part of it's a function of the times. But it's also a function of polarization, and not left-right polarization, but polarization of issues. This day after in Gaza is one. What to do about the hostages is another. But yeah, there was an unprecedented breakdown in discipline from a government point of view in the military back in March, when Netanyahu was fiddling around trying to get essentially greater control, governmental control over the judiciary, right? And there was army, military pushback, popular pushback on that, and the military took front and center stage. There were reports, of pilots not reporting to duty. Gallant himself resigned, and Netanyahu backed down. So all of this happened even before the war. The divisions were there. The war has exacerbated them, and I think Rafah and this question of the day after has brought them to a crescendo. And I think, while all this is going on, the question is, what's Hamas doing? What's happened to Hamas? And I wrote an article about this just yesterday. But if you look at, let's throw aside all this just talk about what Hamas was seen here, Hamas was seen there. Let's just look at, Hamas leadership, infrastructure, their fighters, their units and their ideology. And I'm not going to, bore you guys, but bottom line leadership, the Israelis have, they say, killed 113 of Hamas's leadership, most, the mid-ranking guys. Well, the BBC didn't challenge the claim about leadership. It challenged the names on the list because it was finding, it found the name of a janitor. It found the name of, not a journalist. It found duplicate names and all of this. So the list may not be accurate. The Israelis, again, claim that it represents 70 to 80% of Hamas's leadership. But I would argue whether it's accurate or not is irrelevant, because of the way that Hamas is structured. All of those guys will have been replaced seamlessly. Hamas, you'll see in IDF briefs, the Hamas referred to as though it's a military structure, brigades and battalions. And indeed, Hamas uses that terminology. It uses brigades for regional organization, and it uses battalions just kind of a loose method of authority, but most of all for succession of command, right? So if someone does get killed, they get replaced quickly. So the whole structure is designed to replace people in a hurry. So whether or not they killed 113 of these people makes little difference. And of the top three, the three guys who who organized and who planned and executed 7 October, only one, Mohammed Isha, I'm going to mispronounce his name, Iswat, who was killed just this last week. Only one of them has been killed. So leadership pretty much intact. Infrastructure, you don't have to take it from me. I can just tell you about Israeli targeting techniques. They target tunnel shafts, right? They have to. I mean, it's the most visible, detectable part of the tunnel. It's the most vulnerable. The thing is that the way the tunnels are structured in Gaza, the shaft is insulated by an outbra. The only thing I can call it is another kind of an outshoot from the main tunnel. So the shaft doesn't even lead to the main tunnel, and the main tunnel will have, maybe 4 or 5 shafts, and the tunnels on the tunnel framework, which is one single tunnel with all those offshoots, is not connected to another tunnel. So you see, you've destroyed a shaft, and you've destroyed a shaft, and that's how the Israelis are reporting tunnel destruction. You haven't even destroyed the entire tunnel, let alone touched the network by hitting that shaft. So when the Israelis say that they have destroyed 400 tunnels or whatever, that means 400 strikes on shafts in which they could see they've destroyed just closed the shaft. Yeah. There's and there was an expert quoted in Israeli papers this week. I forget her name, doctor at one of the main think tanks, but her area of expertise is in underground warfare, and she says, in her words, it would be impossible to destroy that framework of tunnels, Hamas's framework of tunnels, and so the most important of those are the tunnels that connect Gaza to the outside world, to Egypt, that go under the Philadelphia crossing, and those have not been destroyed. And are not being held right now, although the Israelis are sitting on top of them. So you'll see that when you're talking about destruction of buildings above ground, and you're talking about destroying Hamas's inventory of ordnance, which Israel has been, quite successful in doing, if you haven't touched Hamas's means of replenishment, then it matters little what else you have messed up. So a lot of destruction, but I would argue that very little of it to Hamas's critical infrastructure. And then you've got the fighters, right? Units or fighters. What I've said, it makes no sense to talk about. But below battalion, you are talking about 2s and 3s. All right, one of the largest attacks, infiltration attacks in the entire war, and it tied down a battalion for 3 days, was conducted by 6 guys. All right. And I heard that from repeatedly, brigade commander battalion, and that was one of the largest attacks. These guys are operating in 2s, 3s, even 1s, RPG, mines, IEDs, you name it.
Yeah. How do you destroy something like that?
Exactly. So that is why the IDF is so focused on a body count. One senior general commented to the papers, we've become Westmoreland, which, and on focus on that. But the problem is that for the intelligence guys, they're like, look, you can talk all you want about destroying brigades or battalions, but it doesn't mean shit. The only way to measure the effect you're having on him is to kill his people, because those little groups are his main component of combat power, and the way to hurt them is simply to kill people. That's the argument, and that's why it's been reported. So then take a look at, before the war, the Israelis said that Hamas had around 30,000 guys. By that, I mean, they meant 30,000 guys in Gaza who were being paid to do Hamas things most of the time, right? Full-time, more or less full-time fighters. They claim to have killed 13,000. Now, if you look at total figures of those killed, 35,000 something, and yes, the figures come from the Gazan Health Ministry, Hamas control, but you notice too, the UN not just the UN, but independent, as a UK NGO tracking casualties. But anyway, there isn't a lot of dispute about the number of figures. Percentage of those women and children, there isn't a great deal of dispute. 2/3, just over 2/3, as they. So my point is that if 2/3 of 35,000 is 24,000, so even if every single military age male who was killed in Gaza was a member of Hamas, that's 11,000 guys. Okay, which is not the 13,000. So that might be a little steep when they say they killed 13,000 people. But on the other hand, they probably incapacitated 2 to 3 times that many, right? Wounds and everything else. So it's not unreasonable to say that they could well have, for all intents and purposes, destroyed Hamas's personnel. They killed or incapacitated 75%. Okay. Does that mean Hamas is done though? I mean, how deep has the ideology seeped into the population? I mean, some say that the ideology was already deeply steeped in the population from decades of being holed up in Gaza together, right? But the question is, has what has happened since 7 October increased that support or reduced it to zero? And I would say it's very unlikely that it's reduced it to zero.
Right.
And that ideology may be Hamas's most deadly legacy and the greatest yet, and the greatest threat yet to Israel.
Yikes. All right, we got one more. I mean, yeah, by itself, it seems like a completely futile enterprise to be trying to do this. We got one thing that came in just before we started from The Guardian about former Israeli spy chief threatened the International Criminal Court prosecutor over war crimes inquiry. That was prior to October 7 and like the kickoff of all this. Jay, you wanted to talk about this a bit.
Yeah, so this is a classic. We talked in I think one of our first 2 episodes about motivations for committing espionage, and which is MICE, M-I-C-E. One of those is coercion, and it seems that in this case that was the goal. So the ex-Mossad chief Yossi Cohen, it was alleged that he headed up himself personally a operation to coerce the International Court's prosecutor. I'm going to screw her name up, Fatou Bensouda, into dropping any pursuit of any kind of charges against military personnel or higher ranking political figures. So the operation was first it started out kind of like whispers in her ear about that this may, it would be in her best interest to let this kind of thing go. But according to her, it got increasingly hostile and persistent. And most intel ops don't normally start that way. It's usually pretty, or I should say, they don't normally start full steam. It usually ramps up that way depending on the intel agency. But these veiled threats eventually got to an old school mob style. Hey, it's a dangerous world out there. Got it. Why don't you let us protect you and your family? So that was the backhanded way of issuing a threat that you never know what's going to happen. It's a bad world out there. A lot of wolves at the door. So let us protect you. And then eventually it would be, well, we're protecting you. In exchange for that, why don't you back off a little bit? So sometimes that works. A lot of times it doesn't. And I'm going to say this in my own little bubble that I worked in. I do not speak for the U.S. government or intel agencies when I say this. We don't use, or we're taught that we don't use coercion. I'm not saying that in way above me that someone hasn't done it or authorized it, and I'm sure it was done a long time ago, but most of the time it doesn't work. It's just if I beat you long enough, you're going to tell me exactly what I want to hear, whether that's the truth or not. So coercion can it can go one way or the other, and so that's why most Western intel agencies don't use it. So, like you said earlier, it happened before October 7th, and Cohen. I don't know what his influence is now. I do know I'd read that he had been a rising political star, some political steam. But Andy, maybe you know a little better than me. What?
I don't. But actually, I've got a question. Totally not off topic. But going back to your comment about coercion.
Mm-hmm.
So is blackmail regarded as a form of coercion?
Yeah. Yeah.
Certainly. I mean, but that seems to be when we look at motivation for essentially U.S. traders, right, who turn over. What is it money that is the
usually
the biggest single?
From what I've studied, it looks like usually it's money and ego going hand in hand. Most time, look at Robert Hansen. He needed the money, but he also was 100% sure that he could get away with it because he was a smart guy, very smart guy. He knew his job, he knew the ins and outs of it, so he knew how to get around all of it. But those two things, his ego and need of money, although at a certain point he really didn't need it, it just became a thing, overtook him. And plus he got, well, I shouldn't say him, but others got family involved. So once you start adding those loose ends, as they say, something's going to go wrong. So coercion, at least from a U.S. standpoint, I don't know of any incidents, and I'm sure someone can tell me in the comments. Ideology, I think, more played into it towards the end of the first Gulf War and the beginning of the War on Terror. You had people who had been radicalized, and so eventually, if they were in that position to give information, they started doing that. But mostly it was money and ego, and they usually go hand in hand, just like coercion and compromise usually go hand in hand.
So that's really good. So coercion and compromise. So I would say the initial for the U.S. For U.S. traders, essentially, who'd sell secrets, motivated by greed, but regardless of motive, after that initial contact, there's always coercion.
Yeah.
Right. And even for a U.S. case officer, after that initial hook, after the initial transfer, there's implicit coercion.
Yeah.
Even if he doesn't intend it. Right?
Exactly.
It is
even if you don't intend it. Yeah, because part of what your relationship with that recruitment is you want to ensure them that their safety is your priority. So you have your training, but you also want to impart on them that you're going to use your training to keep them and their family safe and their job safe and all that stuff. So that's the implied coercion. It's like, okay, well, now you've taken a little money, you've given me a little information. Even if they haven't taken money yet, it's like you're not going to actually come out and say it, but it's like you just took a step down that road. Now now I have to keep you safe. So that's always in the back of their head, like, you don't come out and say it, but it's implied, and in the back of their head they're thinking, well, shit, I just gave him information, so now I have to, rely on this guy, and now I have to keep it going. And some do somewhere down the road or early on say, you know what, I'll take my chances, I'm not doing it, and okay, here's your little bit of money or whatever, thanks, for working with us. But some people just eventually something else takes over, whether it's I think it moves out of coercion after a while, and it becomes the money is great, the medicine for my child is great, the possible promise of being bought to the US, all those things start to take over. Whereas when you have somewhere like maybe the Chinese MSS or something like that, where it's like, that guy's in a hotel or that female's in a hotel and they come walking out of the closet with a camera like, hey, gotcha.
Yeah.
You know, I think after a while that fear, I'm not going to say it starts to wear off, but they become desensitized to it. And that's why a lot of them at certain points just choose to defect. They just choose to, well, I'll take my chances, get the hell out, you know? So, yeah.
And I know this may sound, a little bit hokey to some, but it's fair to say too, do you think that they're for the US at least, I mean, only that I can speak of, but when a case officer establishes a relationship, trust has to be involved.
Absolutely.
Building trust, and that protection, physical protection of sources is central to, for instance, the agency's ethos now, regardless of whatever happened in the past.
Yeah.
It is absolutely central. And to each case officers, you never, I mean, it's like it goes beyond attorney-client privilege, right? Because people's lives are at stake, and it's very, and the whole, the ability of the institution to do what it does well depends on that
Absolutely.
trust.
Yeah. And that's why as you get to an early point, as early as possible in the relationship, you want to move that relationship from public, whereas, hey, I just met this person at a embassy ball or, on the tennis court, as quickly as possible, but as safely as possible, move that into a semi and then a fully clandestine relationship behind closed doors, and at every meeting you are reiterating that their safety is paramount and that you are doing everything in your power to keep them safe, which behooves them to listen to what you're saying to them and heed your instructions, those kind of things, because I always, it was taught to me, and I always say that usually depending on the situation, the country you're working in, the most you're going to get, you're going to get is, thrown in jail. They're going to, if you get caught, they're going to, oh, we're going to keep you here forever, blah, 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 that kind of thing. And behind the scenes, State Department, depending on your cover, is working on getting you back, a trade, whatever it is. You get kicked out of the country, you're persona non grata, you don't come back. But you emphasize to them, you get caught, it's your life or your freedom. So it behooves you. So think about now on the front end of that, if you just coerce somebody into doing it. Hey, I have these, I've got these photos of you with this prostitute. I'm sure your job doesn't want to find out, blah, blah, whatever. Well, situations change. What if 6 months from now, that guy and his wife or that woman and her husband are getting a divorce and they don't give a shit that you have the pictures anymore. So now your coercion is just fizzled out. So I think it's easier to go with the money and the ego and possibly the ideology as well.
Yeah, ego's a big one.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
Just finished just reading the book Fat Leonard, by the way. I recommend it to everyone. And you want to talk about, fortunately, Fat Leonard was not a foreign agent, because he would have wreaked havoc, yes, not just on US 7th Fleet, but on US security.
Yeah.
But you want to talk about greed and ego as motivations. 91 admirals were caught up in that investigation. And in the view of many more number of them should have gone to prison. Only one ended up going to prison in the end. But when you read it, it's incredible, and our peers, Navy captains, a Marine colonel, just making idiots of themselves for, party favors, prostitutes, champagne parties. But most of all, having their egos stroked.
Absolutely.
Okay, it's just unbelievable.
It is.
That was great. All right, so to stroke Andy's ego a little bit, check out his book. The link is in the description. It's a great book, award-winning.
Stroke,
If
stroke my pocketbook. Actually, that's enough stroking for you. It's like I already had to spend a night at your house.
Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're listening to us on audio. Rate and review it. Best thing you could do also is share it, tell a friend about it. And our Patreon, patreon.com/theteamhouse. You can find Andy. All the links are in the description, from his Twitter to his book to his LinkedIn to his Substack. Jason, no, not happening. And
I
yeah,
got a
this was
shout
great.
out. I got a shout out,
Please.
real quick. Okay, I want to try and get this message to the 2nd Battalion Royal Gurkha Rifles and their CO Colonel Nick. Thank you so much for just an awesome time. Last Friday, I got to speak to the regiment, and I tell you what, if you are at all intrigued by elite forces, then read up on the Gurkhas, the most extraordinary group of individuals, and they remain so. And it was my great privilege and honor to be able to talk to them.
Awesome.
So yeah, Royal Gurkha Rifles, hoorah, whatever they say. Ayah Gurkhali.